Hello again, feral friends and fellow nature nerds, and thank you for tuning in to this Dirt Dispatch number 48. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara. So, recently I was doing an in person program about wolves, and I mentioned that Wyoming has wolves primarily in the northwestern part of the state, in the area in and around Yellowstone National Park. Afterwards, one of the staff who was listening came up to me and told me that his brother in law was an avid hunter and had told him on several occasions that there are wolves on Laramie Peak, part of the Medicine Bow Route National Forest not too far from here, and furthermore, that they've been there for years. Now, this falls under big if true. If it was true, this would be interesting and, well, kind of a big deal. But I'm a skeptic sometimes, especially when it comes to second and third hand claims. So I set out to see what I could find out. First of all, let's look at the Laramie Peak area. Laramie Peak reaches an altitude of 10,275 feet, 3,132 meters. It's located in the Medicine Bow National Forest, which encompasses nearly 1.1 million acres, 4,500 square kilometers, here in southeastern Wyoming. The Medicine Bow Mountains connect Medicine Bow National Forest to the Roosevelt National Forest and Rocky Mountain National Park down in Colorado. And then there's Route National Forest, which lies just west of all this land and includes another 1.2 million acres, 5,000 square kilometers. So altogether, this is 3.3 million acres of public lands, 13,000 square kilometers, of what would be excellent wolf habitat. Not very populated with humans, not a lot of roads, and containing the large ungulates that are favored by wolves as prey. Now, according to the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, we have about 300 wolves here in Wyoming, primarily concentrated in the northwestern part of the state. About 100 of those wolves are in Yellowstone National Park, where they're protected. Outside the park, gray wolves in Wyoming are managed under two legal classifications, either trophy game animals or predatory animals. So essentially, in a large area surrounding Yellowstone, and just eyeballing it on the map, I'd take a rough guess that the area is about twice the size or maybe a little bit bigger than Yellowstone itself. Game and Fish sets wolf quotas and monitors wolf hunting seasons annually. In the rest of the state, about 85% of the vast state of Wyoming, wolves are classified as predatory animals. And what that means is they can be hunted or trapped at any time without a license. All you have to do is report it within 10 days to Game and Fish. So let's ask the question, is it possible that there are wolves near Laramie Peak in Medicine Bow National Forest? The simple answer is yes, it's possible. If they were coming from somewhere near Yellowstone, the distance as the crow flies from Yellowstone National Park to Medicine Bow National Forest is about 282 miles, 454 kilometers, well within the abilities of a wolf to traverse. Or it's possible they could have come up through Colorado. In 2019, Colorado's North Park Pack was established by a female wolf that wandered from Yellowstone across Wyoming and into Colorado, where she met and mated with a male wolf that had also come from Wyoming. And there have been credible but unconfirmed wolf sightings in this part of Wyoming. For example, in 2023, there was a reported sighting of two wolves in a part of Medicine Bow National Forest called Vidavoo, between Cheyenne and Laramie. Now, this is an area of the forest that's not anywhere near Laramie Peak. It's a separate unit of Medicine Bow National Forest. It's farther east, but it's still included as part of the National Forest lands. The witness was a Montana resident whose credentials were that he was, quote, familiar with what wolves look like and how they move, having spent time in Canada's remote Yukon territory, unquote. Now, I'm not saying that he's mistaken. Like I said, it's entirely possible that these were wolves, and this guy obviously had experience with wolves, and his description matched that of wolves from the North Park Pack. What I am saying is that he saw them from several hundred yards away for a short period of time and while he was distracted by his own dogs. When he tried to get closer to get a picture, they had disappeared. In an interview about the sighting, retired federal ecologist Chuck Neal stated exactly what I just said. Biologically, it's not too far for wolves to travel. But he added that, quote, politically, it would be quite an accomplishment for wolves to survive Wyoming's free fire zone, end quote. And if you need proof of that statement, consider this. In October 2022, three young female wolves, thought to be from the aforementioned North Park pack, were shot after wandering across the border from Colorado into Wyoming. Also consider that while eradication of wolves in the free fire predatory animal zone is not the explicit goal of the wolf management plan, it is the effect. In 2023, a record high 51 wolves were killed by hunters in the predator zone, almost double the 27 that were killed in the regulated hunt. The pair that established the North Park pack were able to make it across the free fire zone, but they were only able to establish a pack because they crossed the border into Colorado. So that kind of begs the question of, is it plausible that there are wolves near Laramie Peak? And that's where things get fuzzier. If there have been wolves near Laramie Peak as long as people claim, it means that they predate the establishment of the North Park pack, as well as Colorado's recent reintroduction of wolves into the state. It would mean that these wolves were not just dispersing individuals passing through, but had established a relatively stable population. That they not only survived Wyoming's free fire zone to get there, but somehow continued to survive it to stay there. They managed to not get into trouble on nearby ranches or get hit by cars, and they managed to do it all while not being photographed or videoed. Also consider that here in Wyoming, wolves and wolf management are a pretty touchy political issue. And the Wyoming Fish and Game Department takes counting wolves in the state seriously, using a labor intensive census style approach that utilizes tracking collars and both ground and aerial surveillance. They've been doing this with precision for nearly 3 decades, ever since wolves were reintroduced into Yellowstone and began leaving the park to reclaim their old haunts. But the reason for this is not so much out of an abundance of concern for wolves, but a desire to keep the federal government from assuming control of their wolf management. The other Yellowstone border states, Montana and Idaho, have significantly more wolves than Wyoming. They use genetic sampling and modeling to derive an estimate of their wolf populations. It's less precise, but it's good enough. Wyoming's wolf population, however, hovers extremely close to the minimum number needed to keep the federal government from taking over wolf management in the state. So they want to know the exact number. Essentially, game managers here in Wyoming tend to know, maybe not where every individual is, but certainly where packs have become established. An article in the Laramie Boomerang in October of 2024 featured an interview with Wyoming Game and Fish wolf biologist Ken Mills and stated that, quote, wolves have failed to permanently establish in places like the southern Wyoming Range, the Bighorns, or any other chunk of mountainous country with cover outside of the Yellowstone region. Translation: it's unlikely that there is an established population of wolves in Medicine Bow National Forest. Now, I don't want to call it an urban legend. How about rural rumor? That seems more appropriate. Now, I do have to give Wyoming's precision some credit. They use that data to drive their management decisions. Wyoming has consistently retained relatively few wolves. Game and Fish aim to maintain a population of 160 in the regulated trophy game area, and it hits that mark year after year. In 2023, the population of wolves in the trophy game area was tallied at 192, which meant the population was 20% higher than the 160 wolf objective. But instead of increasing the number of wolves that could be hunted, they decreased it by 2. It seems counterintuitive, but in the article, Mills states that the recruitment, which is the number of pups that are born and survive, would likely decline on its own due to the higher number of wolves at the end of 2023. Basically, the number of wolves that would die from causes other than hunting and the recruitment were expected to offset each other. So, there you go. Are there wolves on Laramie Peak in Medicine Bow National Forest? Maybe, but unfortunately, probably not. At least not an established pack. But we can still hope, can't we? Hope that they could live there while evading detection, or better yet, hope that someday people's attitudes change and we can learn to coexist with these magnificent canids. And with that thought, we'll wrap this one up. If you want to support the podcast this year, and by extension, my quest to avoid getting a quote unquote real job, here's some ways you can do that. Become a patron. Subscriptions start at just $5 a month, and with 3 paid months, you get some very cool Dispatches from the Forest merch. You can find all the details at patreon.com/dispatches from the forest. You can donate using PayPal or Venmo and my email address, dispatchesfromtheforest@gmail.com. You can also use that email address to, email me if you have a question, a comment, or a request for a future episode. You can donate using the Cash App and the hashtag ForestNerd. If you prefer to send a check, just shoot me a message and I'll happily provide my mailing address. Check out the merch store at cafepress.com/shop/dispatches from the forest. Then just click on products and find something you like. Finally, follow Dispatches from the Forest on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara, reminding you to go outside and get dirty. Dispatches from the Forest recognizes that the lands where we live, work, and recreate are the traditional homelands of the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho people. We understand that this land holds immense significance for the original stewards, native nations, and peoples of this region. Dirt Dispatches is a production of Dispatches from the Forest and may not be used or rebroadcast whole or in part without express written permission.